everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass, and you are listening to another episode of It's All About Food, broadcast on the Progressive Radio Network since 2009. Thank you for joining me today. Hey, if you're new to It's All About Food, thank you for being here. You may be wondering what we talk about. Food, right? But it's more than that. And there's a lot of things that we need to talk about related to food and just life on Earth in general. I just want to bring on my guest. John Sanbonmatsu is professor of philosophy at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. He's the author of The Postmodern Prince and the editor of Critical Theory and Animal Liberation. He lives in the Boston area, and you can go to his website, johnsanbonmatsu.com. We're going to be talking about the new book coming out June 17th, The Omnivore's Deception, What We Get Wrong About Meat, Animals, and Ourselves. John, I'm so happy to have you back. Thank you for joining me.
I'm delighted to see you again, Karen. Thanks so much for having me.
So as I mentioned to you the first time, which was a couple of months ago, that I've been following you a long time. I don't know why. I never spoke with you or had you on the podcast. And then we had our interview, and then I got to meet you in person. And that really felt really good to me.
That was a great experience. I'm so glad you reached out.
You know, there are a lot of activists and a lot of vegan activists. And I think we all have the same mission at heart, but we go about things in a different way. And as the world becomes more polarized on everything, you know, even in the vegan movement, we have people that disagree about how we should go about things. So I have my favorites, my personal favorites, the activists that I respect the most, whose work I respect the most. And you're definitely on the top of the list. It's funny because I know we like to read and hear about the things that we like to read and hear about.
Yeah.
And although there's a lot of difficult stuff in your book, and we'll get into that, I was nodding my head the whole time. Like, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. So maybe I'm a little biased that I loved your book because I agree with all of it. And also, I want to talk about this maybe a little later, but you mentioned other activists. And for the most part, you mentioned all the other activists that I really adore. So I'm glad that they all got mentions, and I definitely want to bring up some of their names as we go in conversation. Some of them who are no longer with us, and I want to keep their memory alive. Okay, The Omnivore's Deception, What We Get Wrong About Meat, Animals, and Ourselves. Now, it's obvious to me the title, The Omnivore's Deception, is very similar to a very popular book by Michael Pollan, The Omnivore's Dilemma. I have to admit something. Disclaimer. When I have people on this program to talk about their book, I read the book. And I read your book, and I just finished it yesterday. And I took a lot of notes. I have not read The Omnivore's Dilemma. And maybe I should. But there are reasons why I haven't. Because everything I've read about it from what other people say make me not want to read it. So you bring up a lot of books in your book. And I'm assuming you've read some of them, most of them, I'm not quite sure. You've read The Omnivore's Dilemma?
I'm afraid I have. Yeah, I put off reading it for years. What happened is that in 2006, when it came out, a friend of mine mentioned it. I think she was going to go to the beach with it, and she was saying, "Oh, you know, it's such a great book," and I grumbled about it. I had not read it, but I had read about it, and I knew that this book would be hugely damaging to animals, to animal advocacy, to the way we think about food and meat and so on. And I said this to my friend, and she said, "Oh," she was very confused. She said, "Oh, I think he's an ally." And the truth is that this is how the reading public received Pollan's book. Oh, well, he cares about animals, and this is a way that we can think about food and animals in the food system, and have our, as I put it in my book, have our meat and our conscience too. And and of course, it turned out I was right that that book was and continues to be incredibly damaging to animal justice. And so it took me years before I could screw up the courage to read it because I knew that I would hate it. And more than that, I knew it would make me feel powerless and helpless because, there's that famous saying that a lie will travel halfway around the world while the truth is still pulling on its trousers. And so when I did read the book, what surprised me about it was how much of that book is an attack on animal rights, and how much of
Mhm.
that book is about him trashing animal ethics, killing animals with his own bare hands so that he could write about it in his book. So there's a kind of sadism in there and a kind of intellectual dishonesty in there. So it was very upsetting to me. Now, pollen, just to be clear, pollen didn't invent the idea of humane meat and so forth. That stuff was already gaining hold in the culture, but it would really be hard for me to exaggerate the importance of that book, the influence of that book in consolidating this new common sense in America about food and animals. This book continues to educate new generations of Americans. It's part of the state mandated curriculum
Oh,
across the
wow.
country at the middle school level,
I
at the
didn't know
high
that.
school level. Yes, it's taught in I believe it's taught in more disciplines, different disciplines in the United States than any book published. Everything from literature to environmental studies to food policy to philosophy to it's unbelievable. And it's also taught at the graduate level. You'll find it in PhD programs. I mean, and Paulin, of course, he's never criticized in the media ever, ever.
Hmm.
He's like a secular saint. He's the one go-to guy that people interview about food and animals. And I just was on masterclass.com, which is a wonderful way to see the top people in their fields talk about lead classes. For example, Joyce Carol Oates leading a class on teaching, or
Hmm.
Serena Williams leading a class on how to play tennis. Well, there's Michael Pollan talking about food. So he's the food guy. So just to be clear, this book is not solely about pollen, but I do give about 3 chapters over to refuting and exposing his bad arguments in Omnivore's dilemma.
Well,
So
I have
yes,
nothing against Michael Pollan, but what I'm against is the work that he's done and the damage he's
sure.
done to our culture.
Yes, yes.
And in my world, I would have your book, The Omnivore's Deception, taught alongside The Omnivore's Dilemma, and people can have that conversation.
Yes, we'll see. We'll see if that happens. Because I don't have a major press. He's got Penguin, I think. Penguin has a whole curriculum for young people. He's written like a special book for students, and it's a
Yeah,
whole franchise. Whole
yeah.
franchise.
He's very well connected.
Yes.
Taking a breath, taking a breath,
And
taking
I
a
have
breath.
no professional envy whatsoever. I'm
Now,
not that kind.
2006, when this book came out, a lot of
Yeah,
things happened. We had the Food and Agriculture's organizations,
that's
long
right.
livestock's long shadow. So it was a really big turning point in the world with its view on animal agriculture. So we had some scientific based information that came out and said, hey, everybody, maybe animal agriculture is not so great for the environment and global warming because of all the greenhouses that are being emitted. And as soon as that report came out, as I discussed a couple of weeks ago with Will Potter and his new book, Little Red Barns, um, how much the lobbyists came out and the industry, the animal industry came out against that report and started to put tons of money into changing that narrative. But but already people were looking at the connection between animal agriculture and greenhouse gases. So it was a good thing. And if people want the truth, they can find it. And then Michael Pollan comes out and says, okay. We don't like animal agriculture. I mean, he kind of is shown as someone who's against factory farming, right?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the animal advocacy movement can pat itself on the back for having given factory farming a bad name. Okay. At least, many people have heard of it and they think it's vaguely they're against it, even though they continue to participate in it. But Pollen and he's just one of other people, right? Even though he's the main one, but they were able to give license to consumers to continue eating meat because in the back of the consumer's mind is this idea that, oh, well, I'm against industrialized animal agriculture, but I don't have a choice and I got my kids and it's McDonald's, so I'll eat that. But in my heart of hearts, I would eat Joel Salatin's, broilers or whatever. Um,
We'll get there.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Joel's
So,
next.
right, okay. Anyway.
Well, what I hear all the time are comments from people who say, oh, I don't like what they do to animals, and I support humane agriculture. I support the humane treatment of animals before they're slaughtered against their will. They don't include that, of course. But there's this hypocrisy, and you talk about hypocrisy. I'm really I don't know, humanity and hypocrisy, they go hand in hand. We're really good at hypocrisy. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. And we want to believe that, yes, we support the kind treatment of animals and we're going to buy grass-fed meat. But in reality, people don't. They just don't. They say they do. They go to restaurants. They don't. They see a sale. They don't. They're fooling themselves. Okay, let's move to Joel Salatin. Now, here's someone else who also did a lot of harm to the narrative about animal agriculture, making it sound like if you do it my way, we're not going to harm the environment. There was a problem with that? No? Joel Salatin, you talk a little bit about him.
Yeah. Well, Saladin, was already kind of semi-famous, or at least was well known in certain circles, and he was a darling of the media already. But Pollen really massaged him into an icon, national icon. And there are chapters in that book of the Omnivore's Dilemma where he talks about Salatin's polyphase farms. And Salatin, the way Pollen represents Salatin as this kind of secular saint who, has figured out a way to keep all the elements of nature in karmic harmony, and he's got his chickens and his pigs and his cows um, and Salatin, for the viewers who don't know him, is a evangelical Christian right-wing guy. And Paul, it's interesting because Pollen himself is on the liberal side of the spectrum, and his readers were overwhelmingly liberal urban types. But here was a way to kind of, for his readers to feel like they were participating in this sustainable, just by reading the book, this kind of celebration of the earth and living in harmony with animals. That's the kind of sick thing about this is, right, it's Joel Salatin is presented as kind of living in a true or authentic relation with animals. These are the animals, of course, that he kills in the thousands every year. And there's just so much mystification that goes on in Salatin's work. He publishes, books. He's interviewed all over the press. Um, and in fact, he has this very reactionary view, animals were put here by God for us to dominate and use and kill. And although Pollen kind of represents him as giving us a little path to the bucolic pastoral past, where there aren't these evil factory farms, instead of these nice little family farms, where the animals are respected and so on. it's just such a load of hooey. I mean, Soliton uses, high technology on his farm, whether the scalding tank kept at a specific temperature or, electric paddocks. And he's got the chickens, which are supposedly, I don't know how he talks about it. So I don't want to get sued for libel. I don't know if he talks about the chickens as free range, but basically he puts these chickens in a device that so they're confined, and this device moves across the fields so they can forage or whatever. But so there's all this technology that's involved, not to mention internet marketing and people travel hundreds of miles. This is the other irony, Karen, is that people travel hundreds of miles to polyface farms for their cut of meat, whatever. And but Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma, his work, Joel Salatin's work, is often lionized by the locavore crowd. Locavorism is the idea that the solution to the problems of animal agriculture is simply to buy local products. But what people forget is, these so-called local products are often shipped around the country, not from Salatin's farm necessarily, but other farms. And people drive, Palm talks about this, people drive hundreds of miles to get their special meat at Salton's farms. Now, I don't need not tell you, Karen, this is not ecologically sustainable. It is completely not. And anytime you graze animals, you're talking about enormous amounts of land, resources, and which means deforestation and da da da. So, but the thing is, Pollan's such a wonderful writer. I envy the guy. He's really a great writer, and he's smart. So he kind of, the way I think of it is, he kind of created cast this spell, and Soliton was part of the main part of the narrative because you want to live out on Joel Salatin's farm and you want to eat his meat. And um, so what's being papered over, of course, is the fact that we don't need to do any of this. We don't need to enact any of this violence on these animals. The last thing I'll say about Salatin and Pollan in this respect is that Pollan makes a big deal about grass. Grass becomes this dharma where everything is grass and we're grass. See, because the cows eat the grass and then we eat the cows. So it's this beautiful cycle of life and namaste. But the truth is grass has nothing to do with human nutritional needs. It has nothing to do with the cycle of life, and it's ecologically damaging to grow grasses and not let pasture grow up into farmland, which sequesters carbon. And anyway, so my book really is. I just want to clarify for your listeners that my book is not chiefly about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, although I have a chapter on that. It's really about the underlying domination and violence that is the basis of our civilization. And the fact, as you were saying about the river in Egypt, denial is the basis of this whole thing. So I'm like trying to shine a light on what we normally don't want to think about.
There is a thread about romance, about being in nature and doing what nature intended and authenticity. And
Mm.
it's bullshit, as you've mentioned, because everybody's using technology and there's nothing authentic about all this technology. Nature never did that. Nature's own intelligence. And you get into some of that later in the book. Maybe we can touch on it. But all of this brilliance that so many different species have that our technology has not attained yet is just amazing. But just look in the mirror, people. You're just bullshitting. Okay, I want to say I should have opened this way, but we're getting to it now. You said you like Michael Pollan's style of writing. He's a brilliant, great writer. John Sanbonmatsu, you are a great writer, and you are a brilliant writer. And
Thank you.
I I want to say that I started reading your book, and every sentence is boom, boom, boom. it's like you don't waste a word. Everything is packed with meaning and power. And I try and read fast. You know, I have a lot going on. And I want to get the book read before I speak to someone. And there were many sentences I had to read several times just because they require chewing.
Mhm.
They require digesting and taking it in slowly because every sentence is powerful. But every sentence is also readable because there are a lot of intellectual works, and I've read them and tortured myself to get through them because there was good information in there. But no, your books are this book is readable. It's very readable and also depressing. But there are
Well,
moments of goodness in them too. So
well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. This book, I've lost count of how many years I worked on it, 12, 15. I don't know. I mean, I wrote many hundreds of pages. I had hundreds of different documents and drafts, and it was just a big existential crisis to get through this thing. And so, yeah, the writing, I think, does reflect the fact that it was winnowed down and polished over the course of years. And so it's very gratifying to hear that you liked it and appreciated the writing because I do see myself as a writer. So so thank you for that
I
compliment.
appreciate good writing. My partner Gary is a writer, and I know about writing, good writing. I think, in my opinion, it's all about my opinion. And then you mentioned the whole locavore thing, and I just want to say we've talked about this numerous times on the show, but there's plenty of scientific evidence that talks about the environmental impact of animal agriculture versus eating locally. And you're still doing better for the environment by eating plant-based foods that you're getting across the universe, across not the universe, across the planet, maybe soon the universe. But animal agriculture is so detrimental to the environment that even if you're traveling, even if your broccoli is going miles and miles and miles, it cannot keep up with the amount of greenhouse gases and destruction of the environment that animal agriculture does, even if you're getting it locally.
Absolutely, that's such a good important point. I mean, yeah, as you say, there've been a lot of studies about this that look, if I have a if all things are equal, I have a choice between eating a tomato in my garden or having one shipped to me from Florida. All
Duh.
things being equal, yeah, of course, but things aren't equal because, as you say, that in fact most of the resource consumption that occurs in agriculture occurs at the point of production. It's not the transportation, it's what's involved in the production of the thing, not the transportation costs, which are ecological. So yeah, just to second that. But again, it's like, so the question is then why did everyone get on that train? Like it's the last one out of the station. Why did everyone latch onto this locavorism thing? And by the way, carno-locavorism is really what we're talking about. I mean, because there's so much emphasis within the locavore movement on animal products. It's like the central motif. And what I argued in the book is, look, it's not an accident. It's because the meat industry was looking for a way to recover the lost narrative, the romance as you describe it, and as I describe it in the book, the romance of meat and animals, and so there were these huge industrial, economic pressures for that, and then there was the consumer side, which is, as you say, hypocrisy and what I call self-deception. The omnivore's deception really is not merely critics who are defending ethical, quote, ethical meat, but the consumers who want to deceive themselves about it.
I have to say that every line, every sentence, every chapter was boom, boom, boom. Everything is so powerful. What I think what got to me personally the most was the chapter Murder, She Wrote.
Mm,
The chapter on women. Some of them even were vegetarians at some point.
right.
And then they found meaning. They found authenticity. And I've got air quotes going
Yeah.
on And they found this romantic lifestyle connected to the soil and the earth by having a farm where they raise animals and slaughter them. And you have numerous examples from different books, which I have not read, of different women that have chose this path. Now, there was a time, I've been doing this podcast since 2009, and publishers would just send me books in the mail. Fortunately, now they don't do that as much. They'll send me an email and include a PDF or ask me if I want the book. And I really prefer that, because I used to get these books from women who had started these farms, and I couldn't read them, and I didn't want those words on paper in my apartment. There's
That's
life
funny.
there somehow. But very upsetting and very sadistic. And women are not supposed to be like that. You know, we like to say that it's more the masculine thing, not the feminine thing.
Yeah, it was extremely upsetting to me to have to read these books. I read dozens of them, and that's the thing that was just so like bizarre. Just that there are literally dozens, if not, frankly, Karen, hundreds. I don't know. I didn't bother to count them out, count, how many there are. But if you look at women's nonfiction as a genre, literary genre, the farming memoir in particular, if women's farming memoir has just, it's one of the leading sectors of women's nonfiction, memoir writing. It's extraordinary. So I felt I had to look at that. And I did so with some ambivalence because, I'm a man, I'm writing about these issues, and I don't want to be seen as beating up on or choosing to critique women per se. But here's the thing. Carol Adams uh, wrote this incredible book, called The Sexual Politics of Meat in 1990. And
Mm.
the title of her book, Sexual Politics of Meat, was meant as a kind of homage to an earlier book published in 1970 called Sexual Politics by the feminist Kate Millett. And there were other important theorists like Josephine Donovan and Marty Keel and Anestra King, who were ecofeminist writers, and my friend Karen Davis, we may talk about, who also brought a feminist perspective to these issues. And so, as you say, we want to think that this project of mass violence and violation, right, is a masculine enterprise, and it mostly has been for thousands of years. That isn't to say that women haven't participated in harming animals, because they always have, and we have to be careful not to overstate, the one-sided gendered nature of this. Women are willing participants in violence against animals, always have been to some extent, but nonetheless, Virginia Woolf in Three Guineas, her critique of war, she makes this pointed remark about how, it was you guys with your rifles that go around killing animals, and it's like not us women. But what I'm finding is that I begin that chapter by talking about masculinity and the kind of warrior-like mentality of hurting, the sadism of wanting to hurt animals that we find in our culture. It's just so obvious, right? Most hunters are men, most fishers are men. The people who run the meat industry are men. So it's not like that's gone away, but there's this kind of this weird popular embrace of women dominating, killing animals, becoming cattle ranchers and hunters and etc. And in I think it was 2010, there was an article in the New York Times Magazine on the so-called Femivore's dilemma. So it was meant to piggyback on Pollan's Omnivore's dilemma, and it was about all these women doing this stuff. And so that got me curious. So I started reading these memoirs. And what I came to realize is there is a reason for why this is happening. And on the one side, there's the fact that there's been this misogynistic backlash against women, and women who were promised a certain, like especially middle class white women who were promised a kind of equality with men have still not gotten it. So there's a kind of impotent rage there, I think, kind of a longing for something they haven't gotten. And then at the same time, the meat industry and the culture generally is looking for new ways to legitimate or justify this system of violence. And one way to do that is to talk about how we can kill with compassion. We can exploit animals with feminine care,
A
right?
woman's touch.
Woman's touch. And Temple Grandin, who I talk about in my book, right, is
Mm.
central to that. She's the most popular writer by far. Well, she and Barbara Kingsolver, I guess, but Grandin, has had a whole biopic in Hollywood devoted to her, starring Claire Danes. The Museum of Modern Art I think it was in New York City, described her as an animal rights activist. This is Temple Grandin, okay, whose entire career is about sending animals to their doom.
Hmm.
That's her whole thing. So yes, that chapter, Murder, She Wrote, it was not easy for me to write it, but I really think it's important that we understand that these cultural forces that are shaping the way we think as a society, right, about our relations to other animals. And as you said, the word authenticity is crucial to these women. They want to get in touch not only with nature and animals, but with their own truest womanly self. And so what we see over and over again in these narratives is women hurting animals, uh, uh, whipping them, and then finally killing them as a way to achieve supposed feminine empowerment. And even feminist empowerment, right? There's a difference between feminine and feminist, but some of these women literally see what they're doing as a feminist project, and it's quite perverse.
I am a woman. I identify as a woman with two X chromosomes, all that stuff. Um, I have recognized misogyny from a very early age. I was raised Jewish. I am not religious, but when I was a young girl and I saw the boys going to Hebrew school to get bar mitzvahed, I was questioning, wait a minute, why can't I go? And I demanded to go. And I went and had a bat mitzvah. And it was interesting learning about all of it because it made me realize how ridiculous all of it is. But aside from that, um, I just saw that was my first experience of discrimination against me as a woman. And then, I made choices in life because of those things going on. I've always been confrontational and loud and standing up for, things that I saw were wrong. I was an activist coming out of the womb. Uh, and I chose when I was going to college to become a chemical engineer because I knew there weren't many women that were doing that. Now, I had other things that I was interested. I was interested in painting and fine arts, and I was interested in performing, but I chose something because I felt it was a responsibility
Mm.
as a woman to be part of a field where there weren't many women. And I got my master's and I succeeded in the field, and I saw lots of discrimination against me, and I was loud and I fought against it, and that all of that happened. And I also love nature. And I understand, what a woman wants to do, trying to be strong and have more masculine characteristics to be accepted in the current world. I get all of that.
Mm, mm,
But I also haven't eaten meat since I was a teenager, and that would never, ever drive me to want to raise and slaughter meat. That's insane. Now, I did some 20 years ago buy 40 acres of jungle property in Costa Rica because I
mm,
I bought into that fantasy of
mm,
farming and
mhm,
growing food. And it's still in the works. I haven't done much with that property, but it's still in my list of things to do to grow food and connect with nature and to protect animals. Right now I'm not doing anything with that property. I consider it a sanctuary for all the animals that are living there. So reading this section was really difficult, and I'm just so disappointed. Well, I'm probably a misanthrope, except for some of the wonderful people like yourself and people that you write about in the book. But I'm disappointed with human beings in general, and I'm especially disappointed with women especially the ones in this book, the women today that are part of the Republican Party that are giving up on our rights that we've fought for so long. Okay, I said
Yes,
it.
yes, yes. I mean, the majority of women voted for Trump, right? So
Yeah.
what's that about? And we want to, I identify as a feminist, and I think it's just part of the feminist project to want different possibilities for men and women alike and trans people, which is to say, a society that affirms what we used to think of as feminist values, right? And like early, the second wave feminist movement. When I say feminist values, I mean nonviolence, justice for all, ecological um, protection, and all of these things that kind of dropped out of a lot of liberal feminism. And that created this opening for reactionary movement of women who identify with the patriarchy, is the only way to put it. Now, on the one hand, of course, it's kind of like your courageous choice of going into chemical engineering. These women, a lot of them, they see themselves as pioneers because traditionally it was man the hunter, man the cattle rancher, man the, but that's a liberal feminist conception, the idea that, well, what we want for women is to be just like men. We want women to be bombing some poor, defenseless
Hmm.
civilian, somewhere. Um, but, the more radical or more left feminist position has been, wait a minute, we can do better than that, right?
Hmm.
And it isn't progress for women to just take up the gun, say, or take, and there are these women, as you know, in that chapter I talk about, who just fetishize weapons. I mean, and knives and guns, and in a certain sense, whether they know it or not, I really feel like they're trying to gain acceptance from men. I mean, or from patriarchal structures. But of course, by the same token, this does not get the men off the hook. As say, the men are the ones who are running the animal economy. They're the ones who kill many more animals for pleasure than women do. But we want to have a different conception of masculinity too, right? Where men can feel some connection to nature. Like if you if you're a straight cisgendered whatever man, and you say to your counterpart, another man, hey, let's go off into the woods together for a few hours. You can't say that unless you're saying, let's kill some animals together. You can go fishing with your fishing buddy or hunting with your hunting buddy. But the idea of just spending time in nature with your male friend is going to raise suspicions, okay? In this homophobic culture. You've got to be, and by the way, just as an aside, if you watch the film Brokeback Mountain,
Uh-huh.
which is a wonderful film about two gay men who
Right.
happen to be cowboys. The only reason that worked in the popular culture, okay, is and that homosexuality was accepted in Hollywood, the producers, and then
Sure.
the public, right? Is because those guys are very macho, and they demonstrate their masculine power through dominating and killing animals throughout the movie. If this had been Brokeback Hairdresser or whatever, and you had two gay hairdressers, this would not have had the same, straight men in particular wouldn't have felt comfortable going to see such a movie, I think. So masculinity is very much tied up in our culture traditionally with dominating other animals and distancing men from feelings of compassion and empathy.
There are masculine traits and there are feminine traits, and all people can have masculine and feminine traits. And
Right.
some masculine traits are good and some are not. And I suppose some feminine traits are good and some are not. And I would like to think as a species, we are trying to evolve and become better, although in this moment, I'm kind of doubtful. I spoke to two people last year on this podcast, Bill Hatcher, who wrote The Red Planet, Gendered Landscapes and Violent Inequalities. And he goes back about tens, thousands of years, and as does Jim Mason, the author of An Unnatural Order. And they talk about how we took a wrong turn. And now it's the patriarchy that leads our civilization, and it's doing a lot of damage. We need to bring more feminism back in. That doesn't mean more women. It means characteristics, it means traits, it means nonviolence, it means equality, less dominion over others. And they blame in their books how we got to where we are today with this hierarchy that is an exploitation because of things that happened a long time ago that are just getting more and more severe. Let's talk for a minute about some of the wonderful people you mention in this book, because I'm needing that moment right now. Marty Keel, who passed in 2011, I believe. She was another person who I did not know and wanted to know, that I had read about and admired her work in the intersectional community, linking animal rights and feminism, and all of that was brilliant and good. And then, I had advanced ovarian cancer in 2006 and I survived, and now I'm thriving. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
when other people in the animal rights movement were diagnosed with cancer, some people wanted me to talk to them, thinking that I might help them. And I got connected with Marty, and I knew that
Mm,
I couldn't help her because she had a
mm,
disease that we haven't figured out how to cure. It's
mm.
fast and deadly. But I did go to Greenwich, Connecticut and meet with her. And I'm
Oh,
really glad that I did have a moment to sit with her energy, her light. And we walked around in a garden and we had a very intimate conversation, and I'm very grateful for it. So, Marty, we love you and keeping your work alive the best we can.
yeah. I'm glad you brought her up. Same thing. I never got a chance to meet her. And unfortunately, it's people like Marty who were so smart and insightful about society and gender relations and so forth and animals. It's people like her who are totally eclipsed in this culture by a hundred, 1,000 people I could name who, are op-ed columnists for the major papers, and films get made about them. Yeah, it's just so discouraging. So I'm glad that you're highlighting her work, because many people have never heard of her. Marty
Mhm.
Keel, Kheel.
And then another one, of course, is Karen Davis. I knew her. She was on this program. I had the opportunity to have numerous meals with her when she would come to New York. Just a wonderful, brilliant woman who unfortunately also passed from cancer. And you highlight her in your book and even dedicate your work to her.
Yeah, Karen, one of my great regrets is that I never got down to see her in her element
Hmm.
in her sanctuary in
Yeah.
Virginia, West Virginia. Um, but yeah, I knew Karen over the years, she was just the most remarkable person. And the thing that was so striking about her, you and I have met many activists and over the years. I've never known anybody in any field of advocacy work or justice work who, of any, whether it's for peace or racial equality, whatever, who was as fierce about her project uh, or as committed to the work. I mean, she was just amazing, real force of nature. And I also want to say, she managed to speak to a variety of different audiences, people in the street and so forth, without shaming them. Now, I
Hmm.
think as vegans and animal people, it's very hard. We just feel so alienated from the society, which is based on terrible brutality. It's very hard not to feel self-righteous and to just want to throttle people, to be honest. But Karen was, she was always very respectful. She had a way of just saying, well, look, this is what is happening, and she always assumed people's good side, and I think people responded to that. But that said, she was never apologetic about her activism or about her views. She openly compared what we do to animals to genocide. That was an important part of her work. She wrote a book called The Handmaid's Tale, right, which
Hmm.
is partly about that theme. And the totalitarian nature of what we do to animals. So, yeah, it was personally a big blow that she died so
Hmm.
prematurely. And to be honest, not just like a blow to me as a friend of hers, but just as someone in a movement that's struggling still to gain its footing and to be taken seriously. Karen was one of our leading lights. She really was.
I have no idea if there's any validity to this, but I have a theory that some activists take in all of this evil into their bodies and it comes out as a disease. And we're seeing many activists falling to cancer these days. And I'm one of the lucky ones, but I really think that we have to be so careful in taking care of ourselves while we do this work because it is so difficult and it is so emotional. And I know that it's not just eating a healthy diet, it's our lifestyle, and we have to be taking care of ourselves. And I say that, and I'm asking you, John, how are you? And was this book helpful to you, cathartic maybe in a way, to get all of your thoughts out and on a page instead of holding it in?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, and I'm very sorry for the pain that you feel and that we all feel in this movement. It's super hard. And there's no question, that bearing witness to the trauma of other beings. I mean, I know people, I'm sure maybe you're the same way, who won't watch any more videos of
No, I don't
animal,
want to see it. That's what they say. I
right?
don't want
Of
to see
of
it.
animal atrocities. And that is one thing that I've been told about my book, that it was like, I have a friend who said it was hard to read because I don't mince words, and I show, I give examples of these horrible things that we do. And that's part of the work, right? It's exposing people to things that they don't know about, would rather not know about. But then that means we have to know about them, at least to
Hmm.
some extent. And so it takes a huge toll on us. It certainly has taken one on me. And yes, writing this book was cathartic in the end. It did not feel cathartic along the way because I struggled to finish it. And meanwhile, every time, so I read the New York Times every day. I read,
Hmm.
for 40 years, actually, since I was in high school. And every day I read the paper, and every day I get so discouraged and outraged by what's happening in the world, not just to animals, of course, but to our fellow humans and what the injustices. And thank goodness you have a platform. Thank goodness for me that I published this book. But for millions of people, activists, they don't necessarily feel any, or they don't feel enough. Um, they don't get recognition enough, or they don't feel like their voice is heard enough. Now, I'm not saying I feel heard. I don't feel heard because
Hmm.
just written this book. I don't know if anyone's going to read it, but nonetheless, uh, the Greek myth of Cassandra, of course, right? Who was fated to, she had this gift of prophecy, but it came with this little caveat that no one would believe anything she said, right? So I just feel, I think what we all feel like, oh my God, this is so horrifying. What's happening? Look, look, and no one hears us. No one pays any attention to us. So to finally have my say, as it were, and the book is not perfect, but it does express a lot of the things that I've observed. And I've been thinking about these issues, Karen, for almost 40 years. I've been working on this book for decades, teaching about it, reading about it, these issues. So I am glad that I was able to finish this book, and I hope someone reads it. I hope
I
uh,
read it.
Thank you. And I hope someone who's not already part of the movement reads it, because obviously that's
Hmm.
who it's written for, is the conflict, what I call the conflicted omnivore, which is a lot of people who actually are compassionate people and good people in most other, or other domains of their lives, but they just can't confront this last justice issue, right? What we do to animals.
I wanted to say regarding Karen Davis, whenever I would speak with her, I would always ask her for stories that she had about birds. And she
Hmm.
had so many lovely stories showing the intelligence and compassionate in birds, mostly chickens, but other birds. And you also have one in your book.
Yes.
My eyes got moist when I read it. I don't know if you want to share it or just say, read the book and find out this story.
Well, how about I suppose I could read that passage
Yeah.
because I got an advanced copy of my book.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm very excited. It won't be released officially till next month. Here it is.
Go.
My friend Karen Davis, the founder of United Poultry Concerns, a nonprofit advocating on behalf of chickens and turkeys exploited for food, once drove from Virginia to Maryland to rescue severely traumatized and injured hens raised in crowded battery cages so small that they had been unable to extend a single wing. After retrieving the birds who were exhibiting shock, Karen didn't have the heart to put them in crates for the return journey, so she let them sit together on the back seat instead. As she drove, she spoke calmly and soothingly to the birds. Eventually, they quieted down and began looking around them in curiosity. Then Karen wrote, an astonishing thing happened. The most naked and pitiful looking hen began making her way slowly from the back seat, across the passenger seat separator toward me. She crawled onto my knee and settled herself in my lap for the remainder of the trip, unquote. No one, not even Karen, who worked closely with chickens for decades, could have predicted that this particular hen, who had previously known only violence and degradation in her short life, never a single kindness, would have sought out Karen's embrace as she did. Consciousness is an open rather than closed phenomenon. It is always its own type. Neither energy nor matter, it cannot be reduced to the physical processes that somehow give rise to it. It is not a thing, however much we attempt to contain the animal within an abstract scientific schema of behaviors. It forever eludes categorization and prediction. So when I read that, I was deeply moved
Mhm.
when I read about that story from Karen. And the point in this chapter, which is about cognitive ecology and animal consciousness, is to show that animals are not simply stereotypical automatons. We think of, especially there's this prejudice, as you know, and Karen knew, I talked a lot about prejudice towards birds. As you know, we talk about bird brained and so forth. And in fact, birds who were on this planet millions of years before mammals and are the direct descendants of dinosaurs, uh, their brains are just organized differently, and and they're just as complex. They have just as many feelings, almost certainly, as mammals do. So I learned so much from Karen and from her experiences too.
There's a section where you talk about many different species and how much smarter they are in different areas than we are, because that's where their needs are, I assume. And in the introduction, you say chimpanzees outperform college professors on short-term memory tests. How did you feel about that as a professor?
I forget. We
Yeah,
need a chimp to remind me.
but there were so many. And it was another section that was boom, boom, boom. You just kept listing all of these examples of so many different species and their intelligence. And I hate the word instinct because it is so insulting to the intelligence that all these different species have that we don't recognize or have the capacity to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I respect science. We can learn a lot from science. I've learned a lot from science, but science has some problems too, and particularly in terms of the way scientists and the scientific method have viewed other species for centuries, right? Going back to Rene Descartes, the philosopher in the 17th century, and his contemporary Francis Bacon. It's from Francis Bacon that we get the modern experimental method, of science. And animals have since then been viewed as instinctual machines going about their things. I mean, the word instinct is the most ridiculous word. It doesn't tell us, it's sort of like we use instinct to describe a quote behavior that we don't understand. And what is so annoying, of course, is and exasperating is every time scientists discover that animals aren't quite as stupid as we assume they are, it's like front page head. Oh, well, it turns out that, dogs can, understand up to 1,000 words in the case of Chaser, the border collie, or, octopuses are not, well, octopuses are, quote, intelligent. Uh, but it's just this ideology that we start with, which is that all other animals are unlike us, and they're, yeah, if they have any intelligence, it's like this little tiny thing. And but the more scientists look at these phenomena of other consciousnesses, the more amazing it becomes, And I think if I have some regrets about the book. One is that I wish I'd put that chapter earlier in the book on what's called the chapter's called Animal, Not Vegetable, because now there's another discussion, but there's this big popular cultural shift towards thinking of plants as conscious, and I have nothing against any science about plant behavior or plant experience. Well, I don't want to say plant experiences because there's no evidence that they actually experience their worlds. But I believe that whole discourse is about distracting us from the beings that we know have complex consciousness, which is actually the animals. But in any event, if we just open ourselves to the possibility that we're not alone on the earth, that there are these other ways of knowing, experiencing, other forms of culture, and we need to live in peace and nonviolent relations with our neighbors. They're our neighbors, right? They're not
It's
there.
obvious. It's just obvious. But we have something in our nature where we need to feel unique. We need to feel part of a special group. And we don't just do it against the species that are different from us. We do it within our own humanity. We want to see ourselves different from people from other places. And we always want to be the best, and that nobody else is as good as whatever group we are a part of. I don't know what it is. We don't really have any more time to talk. Sadly, I could talk to you forever about this. So I'm really grateful for this moment. The one thing I want to say, and I think you said it in the book, humanity and capitalism, that's it. Those are the two big issues that are driving all of our problems. But what I want to say is, buy the book. Buy the book, The Omnivore's Deception, What We Get Wrong About Meat, Animals, and Ourselves by John Sanbonmatsu. Buy the book.
Thank you so much, Karen. So, as always, a delight speaking with you.
Okay, thank you for joining me, everybody. While you're digesting this book, I hope you put something yummy and delicious and vegan in your mouth and have a delicious week.